You're at an open house. It's going to buyer to sign out you.
No. Into the.
Ask everybody why they do it.
Right. But so I have to. One of these. Oh, that's the, yeah. They don't want phone number on the open house form. Before they I don't want to force you to put them down. You have to.
There's some weird rules. Okay,
What we got to deal with. Okay, so let's get going. Today's gonna be much more of a discussion than, a formal presentation. This is why I'm sitting and relaxing a little bit. I hope you guys don't mind that.
What's your back hurts?
I didn't want to say that, but thanks for telling me. No, so what I want to ask you real quickly is, I know there's some confusion about open house forms. I'll talk about that a bit. And I know there's confusion about the buyer's broker agreement, when it has to be signed, that sort of thing. And how does that relate to the open house agreement? I'll talk about that. And then I know some people having difficulty deciding how to talk about the buyer broker agreement with their clients. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about some strategies I've been using with my clients on that. But over and above those issues, in regard to the changes, what other conversations, what other issues are you having? What other concerns do you have when you're speaking to clients? Just speak out right now, and we'll see if we can address that as part of the conversation. So sing it out.
What do you want me to say? What I just said before? How he didn't want to sign the agreement and said the road was go to the house.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that during the conversation of the buyer. Right?
And
Okay.
that some realtors are not having some.
Well, we can't do anything about it, but I'll talk a little bit. Okay, well, let me start off with the open house form and how it relates to the buyer.
We have that at the back of this packet.
Yeah, it's in here toward the back. And on an open house, the visitor, non-agency disclosure and sign in.
Anyone?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's the acronym for this is OHNA-SI. Who knows what the hell all that means? Open house visitor, non-agency disclosure and sign in. So the deal is that we're supposed to have a signed buyer broker agreement before we show a property to a buyer. So what you're hosting an open house, you don't know who's coming in, they're not signing a full buyer broker agreement. That's why there's this form. And this form is stating that, hey, an agent holding an open house for conducting in-person or live virtual tours of property identified above. And the visitor who is not, the client of the agent performing this tour wants to come see it. So by signing this form, they're acknowledging that this agent does not represent the visitor. And that any communication that agent has with the visitor is the agent representing the seller, not representing the buyer. There is no agency between the person doing the open house or the tour and the buyer. And any communication you might have with that agent isn't confidential. They can go back and tell their seller, this person looks interested, blah, blah, blah. Now, if that visitor falls in love with the agent doing the open house and wants to write an offer, signing this form doesn't help them. They have to go do a buyer broker agreement with that agent holding the open house. Okay? So that has to happen. Now, you'll notice that they have 5 or 6 lines here for people to sign in. I have a couple of active listings right now. I've thrown out my old open house register. I just use this now, and I punched holes in it and put it in my open house book. And people come in, and I've changed my script fairly radically. And I basically use this as a way to introduce myself to the client. I basically say, hey, you guys probably all heard something about that big settlement, where real estate agents have to change the way they do business. Oh yeah, we've all heard that. We've all heard that. Well, one of the big changes is we have to have everyone coming into the open house signing this form, acknowledging that I won't be your agent. You're just here to see the open house, right? That's right. Well, I need you to sign the form to acknowledge that, and then we're good to go. And most of them just fill it out and put in their email and phone without me asking. And it's like I'm getting 10 times better capture of data than I ever did the old way. So it's working like a charm. And then a couple of people asked me, do I really have to put my email and my phone number here? I said, no, just give me the name and the address. So, but I was talking to Marie just really briefly before it started. She says she's been doing pretty much the same thing, but if they walk out the door, she asks for the number again, she's been getting it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's a pretty good conversation around this form to have with the open house visitors. I really want you guys to be clear on the fact that if they want you to write the offer, you still have to go to the trouble of doing a buyer broker agreement or the PSHR agreement. But it's just the way of the world. The dual agency right now, we're going to have 2 agreements for every deal when we do dual agency. But I haven't been getting pushback from clients coming or visitors coming in to open houses. And I've been getting, people signing it. I have had a couple people say to me, I have an agent, so I don't have to fill this out. I go, oh no, there's a place there to put who your agent is. And funny, half the time they say that, they don't fill it in. I have had a couple people say, okay, I know you need this to comply, but I don't want you to call me. I go, that's fine, I'll respect that, and I put a little star next to it, they don't put this person in my database, as. I think that's where we start getting a bad reputation, when people ask us not to call, and then we do call. I don't think that works so well. So any conversation or questions about this open house form? Or what conversations we should be using when we're asking people to sign it? Let's make this free form. If you have ideas on this or better ways to approach it, I'm all ears. I mean, I have a sales business too. I'll pick your brains as well. Yes,
What happened, they don't sign it?
I talked to a risk management attorney
Throw out.
who I use at Hollywood Hills, all that. And he said that you can't put a gun to people's hands, right?
Yeah.
He said, ask for their name, if nothing else. And then write their name in and put decline sign next to it. And they won't even give you their name. What can you do, right? I mean,
I have the right to not let them see that.
that's correct. I mean, you can always fall back on the old saw that, hey, the seller asks everyone coming into their home sign in. It's the seller's house, they get to make the rules, right? So you can fall back on that. But you don't want to create a huge confrontation in the middle of the so use your judgment, right? You're gonna see this thing, you're gonna see everyone looking at you like nuts, you don't want that, so.
I said it was a law, you have to sign it.
It's not a law. Michelle, I have that before. I'll get to it. Okay. Go ahead, Michelle.
So do they write their name and sign it on here?
No, they just write.
Okay, so just-
Yeah, they don't have to sign.
Okay,
It's
and
funny though, a lot of people have been signing instead of.
Okay, yeah, it's formal. Okay, my second question is like, if we're hosting another event in our brokerage open house, we need this each time. Like I need this form, because I host a lot of
Okay.
houses for our event, so but I need this every single time to, I'm representing another agent that represents the seller.
No, every time they come in, they're still not creating agency with you.
Right.
So yes, you need it every time you host them, even if it's not your open. Maggie?
A question in reference to law,
Mhm.
so this is not really the law, but what is it? Is it a requirement?
It's a requirement.
California Association of Realtors,
Well,
NAR,
the California
or
Association.
DRE?
The California Association of Realtors has developed this form in order to comply with the NAR settlement. So it's created to help comply with the terms and conditions of a legal settlement. That doesn't make it law. But you're open to a lawsuit when you violate terms of the settlement. The class that settled can say, oh, these agents aren't complying. Therefore, we get to sue because we were damaged because they didn't comply with the lawsuit. Now, it's gonna be awful hard for someone to say, well, I came into an open house, they didn't make me sign the form. I didn't understand that they weren't my agent. And therefore, I was, grossly damaged by the fact that this agent never told me that they only represent the seller. It's possible, but I think it's gonna be hard unless that person who's making that claim eventually move forward with a transaction. That's the specific property. I just think it's good practice, especially right now, to be hyper compliant Because remember, the Department of Justice stepped in after Carr did their first version of forms in their attempt to draft forms to comply with the settlement. The Department of Justice looked at those and said, no, we think we have their conversation and we think we need to revise them. What that tells me is the Department of Justice is watching this compliance with this settlement. Extraordinary. And if we start trying to create weird workarounds, not necessarily just around the open house form, the weird workarounds I really want regarding violation compensation. I think the Department of Justice is gonna zoom in, and create even more helpful. So I think we need to be hyper compliant. In regard to that, I think some of you have heard that Coldwell Banker has their own forms,
Yes.
and they're super aggressive. They have one form that's an addendum to the listing agreement that says the seller agrees in writing, a binding agreement that they will pay the buyer agent X percentage of compensation. Every risk management attorney I've talked to who's not associated with Coldwell Banker thinks that's an enormous mistake. And thinks that's gonna trigger the DOJ. So I've had agents forward that form to me and say, Jeff, why aren't we doing this? And my answer is because every lawyer I talk to tells me it's a bad idea. So I have to follow the advice of people who've helped keep this office, by the way, out of trouble. So
That's just like alarms in my head, because we have that.
it doesn't make it a legally binding commitment to pay them. It says that they will consider paying. And they have three options. Coldwell Banker doesn't have.
Yeah, okay, that just some thought.
Yeah, so, well, let me see what. Let me see
Yeah.
what that I say.
Boxes on this, but yeah.
So what it says here. It says seller agrees to pay buyer's agent either X percentage or the amount set forth in the buyer's first representation agreement, whichever is left, if requested by buyer. But it also says later on in this agreement that it's ultimately the purchase agreement that is going to be the guiding document, while the Coldwell Banker form doesn't say that.
Right.
And so that's the problem with Coldwell Banker form. So we can use that, but if the seller gets 10 offers. And a couple of the offers. Say, hey, you don't have to pay the buyer's compensation. Then the seller accepts that offer, then they're not going to be obligated to pay the buyer's compensation. Ultimate guide to this is going to be what's in the RPA. If the seller's gonna. Okay,
So for the time.
so that's fine. So. I think the biggest issue that I've been hearing, and I heard it in the room before I even got started today, is whether the conversations with the buyer surrounding, hey, sign the buyer broker agreement. I can't show you houses until you do that. Yes, question.
Back to the open house.
Okay.
visitor.
We're not done that. Yeah.
And then, how do you feel about just having a sign? Maybe, like a friendly sign, please. Sign this open house visitor non-agency agreement before entering, or must sign.
I think you can have.
So you have this conversation open.
I think that's fine, but I think having the conversation makes sense, because it's your chance to engage. And introduce yourself. And in open houses I've been having. Sometimes I say, hey, I'd like the chance to tell you a little bit about the house before you start looking, but before we do that, can you sign this form, and here's why it's done. And that gets us going, and then they're like, oh yeah, it's subconscious, but it clicks in their head, oh, he's not gonna tell me all the cool things about the house until I sign the damn form. Okay, now tell me. And that's been working pretty good. So, that's my thought. But yeah, it would be, there's nothing wrong. It's just what works best for you. So in terms of conversations around the buyer rep agreement. Oh yeah, there's a question in the back.
So how long are we supposed to do this for?
Well, look at it as, we're supposed to hold all records for 3 years, so to speak. So, if you're the listing agent, just hang on to them as part of your file, right? And upload them in command under other forms. Yeah,
So if another agent holds are open, are we supposed to get that form from them?
I think it's a good idea, it's good practice, but on the other hand, then you have the concern of, hey, these are my leads, I held the house. But, I think it's just smart to hang on to them, create. Storage is cheap on the computers these days, scan them in, have a file for that property you did the open house on. 2 years later, someone sued you because you didn't disclose you were only representing the seller. You have copies of the forms they signed. I know it's a pain, but this is the new world. I don't know how else we're gonna do it. Yeah.
So if they don't do this, we hold accountable.
Pardon? But who doesn't do this?
If the holds are this, they don't do this form. Is this to be held accountable?
Well, the holder of record can be held accountable for not enforcing the rules of settlement. And the agency could get sued because everything you guys do comes back to us. So, yeah, they could be held accountable. Now, is there a strong possibility of a lawsuit emanating for that? I don't think so. Let's just cover our butt and do it right and hang on to the form. If you have an agent doing an open house for you, make sure to tell them, make sure to use this form. That's one of the rules I have for letting you do my open house. Because Jeff will beat me up. Threat of physical violence is my best.
So what about, like, obviously, the house is like lead generation.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of people who came in and they didn't have an agent. Is it okay to ask them if I can represent them? Because that's what I say.
You're allowed,
Okay,
you're allowed to tell your services, absolutely.
right, okay, so we can still do that, okay.
Yeah, I mean, hey, when you sign this form, it says, I'm not gonna be your agent, but we can change that. With just one signature on this other contract, yes, you can have my agent. Okay. Okay, buyer rep agreement, I'll tell you some of the conversations I've had. The first thing I do when I sit down with a buyer now is I kind of walk into it a little slowly. And basically say to them, hey, did you hear about this big lawsuit with us? So try and connect with something they know of. And they say, yeah, I heard about a lawsuit. And I say, well, let's have a conversation about how that affects the relationship between me and you, because that's where the biggest change is. Okay, great, please do that, because they've read the news, but do they know the details, the answers? Heck no, heck. So then I say, well, before we show a house, we have to have a contract with all of our buyers saying that we're gonna be their agent. And, depending on my prior relationship with this prospective client, if it's an old friend or a past client or someone I've had a relationship with in the past, I'm definitely gonna talk to them in the context of the buyer representation and compensation agreement. If it's somebody who I haven't had that much relationship with the past, or it was like a lead that came on the phone saying, this is your listing, I want to see it, I don't have an agent. then I'm gonna try and get them to sign that short form agreement, the PSHR. Active, I think that's it. Well, it's in here somewhere, yeah, property showing representation,
Yes, sorry.
yeah, PSR,
Does this work for leases also?
yes, it does. So
What do you mean?
in the conversation, I basically say we have to have an agreement with you before we show the house, period, story. And if someone absolutely insists that they want to see your listing, but do not want to sign an agency agreement, but they have to sign the open house form. Say, okay, I'm not your agent, I'm only representing the seller, I'll show you the house. And then, of course, showing the house. But bottom line, on the buyer representation agreement, I'll say, in this agreement, it says that you are responsible for paying. The good news is that in an offer, we can ask the seller to pay for it. And they'll say, well, you know, for years and years, that's not how it worked. It was the old way. And I've gotten that protection. I go, I know. It's a huge change, but this is what this settlement agreement spelled out. Our hands are tied. And by the way, every other realtor, and I say real estate, only does cover real. Someone who doesn't belong to the law doesn't have to abide. It should, don't have to. Every other realtor is bound by it. So you go to another realtor, they're gonna have to do the same thing. But if you're concerned, Mr. Buyer, is your objection, because I get it right out on the table, is that you don't want to pay me the commission. And they'll say, yeah, well, yeah, you don't. Okay, there's two things we can do. I can make you less successful as by only showing you those houses in which the seller has said they're willing to consider offers, well, that where they would pay your obligation. But, you know, I think you're not going to be able to see as many houses as you want to because every seller's not going to be. Why don't we do this? Let me talk to you about what I deliver. And once you hear that, I think you'll be willing to say, yeah, this is the sort of professional representation. And if afterward you disagree, you can walk away, but you're going to have to sign this with another realtor anyway. And they're going to give you the same two choices. So rather than trying to see if you can avoid paying a realtor, why don't you focus on making sure I'm the right? And then we can figure out. I've done it twice now. It's worked. One of them still said, I only want to see houses where the seller is willing to pay buyer's time. The other one said, well, I think most sellers are going to be willing to pay it anyway, but you were recommended by a friend, you obviously had a lot of experience. I like the approach you're going to take with me. If worse comes to worse, and the home of my dreams won't pay it, I'm not going to let paying you a commission keep me from getting it. So yeah. Now that person has looked about 4 or 5 houses now. I've called the listing agent every time, and the listing agents every time have said either, yeah, the seller will look at an offer where you're asking them to pay comp, and 2 or 3 of them said, yeah, they're willing to pay up to 2.5%, which is what's on the phone. So I think the biggest fear we have is ourselves, because it's such a bitch. I mean, I know that as well. And I do have a pitch put together, and I think I sent out a draft to you guys maybe 2 months ago. about how I'm selling my value to the buyers. And I think we just have to get used to it. And, you know, buyer pitches are gonna become listing pitches. I mean, everyone has a listing, right? Here's why you should list it. You gotta have a pitch now that says, here's why you should buy. And, you know, I did write into this person's contract, I think the language I used was something like, buyer authorizes broker to only show those homes in which the seller has agreed to consider compensating, the buyer's broker as documented.
So where do you put that?
Other terms,
Oh, we have the chart.
And we have,
Gonna be our, PC board.
yeah, exactly. It said buyer authorizes broker to only show properties in which the seller has agreed to consider offers requesting the seller to pay buyer's commission to broker under this agreement.
That's a form.
No, that's
Stated.
a statement you'll put in other terms.
So,
And that way, you're gonna call the listing agent every time, hey, you know, I want to your house, but. Is your client willing to consider offers where, you know, you're paying it? Yes, they are, great. They want to do it tomorrow, great. And on the listings I have right now. I've received a bunch of those. Where agents are asking, will we compensate? Yes, we will.
Isn't it quite obvious that the only thing you have to do is add 2.5% to the sale price?
Pretty much.
Isn't that gonna be the move that most of us make? It's
Yes.
reason 2.5,
what if the house,
what's that?
what if the house doesn't appraise? If it's a loan?
That's a good question.
How would you do that?
If they're asking $1 million for the house, you have for $1,025,000, you said you offer.
Yeah, but you have.
25.
But then you have to state that amount is used for the commission compensation, the compensation.
No, you're just in paragraph 3G3 and saying, you know, of the RPA. Where you're saying that the seller's gonna pay the buyer's commission. Saying we're getting the commission for the buyer and the purchase. Well, the buyer has to agree with that, and then you're asking the seller to pay. You know, I mean,
don't we check
Oh,
that
you're
data?
asking.
alright,
Don't we check that data now?
3G3?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. Well, what if the buyer says, I wanna make my offer stronger by paying you the commission?
Oh, sorry, no, I'm just talking about the buyer was not.
Yeah.
The buyer is not, we're checking. Right, BG3 is now checked.
Yeah,
all the
yeah,
time.
yeah, if the buyer is only letting you show houses where the listing agent has said, yeah, I'll pay the broker.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you're gonna hit 3G3 every time.
Yeah.
What is it?
I think it's like a kid on the RPA.
Right. Paragraph. Yeah, so this is the other thing I want to cover.
What paragraph are you
G3,
Now,
Oh, yeah.
If, just, I wanna make sure that everyone knows how to do this. And I'll get to your question in just a sec. If you want the seller to pay your commission. And the buyer is okay with it, remember, it's their offer, not yours. You are going to check box 3G3, paragraph 3G3, I believe it is on page 2 of the RPA. And it's gonna say, let me find the exact language,
Seller agrees
you're
to
on
pay.
page 205,
You want me to read it?
I'll read it, and
what page you on? 205.
17.
217 of the RPA. So paragraph 3G3, you're gonna check the box that says seller agrees to pay the obligation to compensate buyer's broker under a separate agreement, which of course. Is the buyer broker. But they're telling you car form SPVB attached. What is car form SPVB? It's a form that says, hey, Mr. Seller. The buyer and me, the buyer's broker, have an agreement where the buyers promise to pay me 2.5% commission. We want you to pay that instead. And on the SPVB, you're supposed to attach page 5 of the buyer representation agreement. Because on page 5 of the buyer representation agreement, there's an additional box that repeats what the commission amount is. That's on page 1 of the BRP.
Number 15, right?
Yeah, and that way you don't have to give them a whole buyer broker, because that's a private agreement between you and buyer. So you're just providing the one page that proves, yes, this is the amount of commission that's on that agreement. So, to summarize,
Okay,
you want the seller to pay the commission that's on the BRDC. You check paragraph 3G3 of the RPA. We provide an SPVB clearly stating what the agreement was on the BRDC. And if you attach page 5 of the BRDC, you submit all that with the offer. The seller can either agree to it or cover it, or wad up the buyer's offer and throw it in the trash. Which, you know, maybe it's a crappy offer, too, but those are the 3 choices. Okay, she was asking a question first, then I'll get, go ahead.
If a buyer and does not want to sign the buyer representation agreement, does that mean I cannot go?
Yes, that means you can't show the property. We cannot show a property without having a signed agreement,
Because,
because that's in terms of the NAR.
okay, well, I'm gonna use Stephen Bond as the example. Okay?
Why, Steve, is a nice. Okay.
Has a listing,
Yeah.
okay? I have a buyer, but the buyer really want me to show. He does not want to sign buyer's agreement. Or can I call Stephen and say, I have this buyer and I have the name and the contact and everything. Can I show it to you? Or can I show you this? Or don't even bother to do that.
You have to have an agreement with the buyer before you can show a property. There's no way around it. So I promise I go there.
But that's. More of money.
Okay.
So on the RPA, so we said the property hypothetically is $1 million.
Yeah.
You're now gonna put the price in as $1,025,000. If that person is getting a loan, where is that $25,000 coming from on the money part? On, let's say it's 80-20.
It's coming from the finance, it's coming from the finance.
So the buyer is financing in the commission.
Yeah. But the lender doesn't know that, they just see a purchase price of $1,025,000. So if the house appraises, great, if it doesn't appraise, you get the standard arm wrestling we always get.
So the seller really is.
You're.
Flat is almost.
Yeah, the buyer has always paid for it, it's the truest axiom in the business. Where's the money coming for this transaction? From the buyer. This gentleman in the back, he's.
Buyers are having trouble, or the agents having trouble with having the buyer sign the rep agreement. Is it okay on page 1, the very bottom page, under terms? Can we just write, offer shall state, seller to pay the above compensation?
Sure, that's fine.
Then they can
Offer,
never-
offer, I would say offer to request stuff would be strong, better, okay, offer to request stuff. That's H, right? Yeah, other terms, you could write that in. The one thing we cannot do, the lawyers have drilled this into my head. We cannot say under H is, no, is that agent will accept whatever compensation is on. That cannot be in, this has to be a clear, tangible agreement. You can say zero, you can accept nothing. Talk to John Morris, your team leader, to see if he's going to like you guys doing. I don't think the agency wants you working for free.
So, sorry, so under H, what he's saying, offer or request seller to pay, we don't put 2.5 over.
To pay buyer's obligations under this agreement.
Okay.
That would be perfect.
Where's that? Okay.
Pay other terms.
Can you say that one? Seller to consider?
But, what, say your, how did you have
Well,
it?
I was trying to fit it without having to have an extra page.
Yeah,
But all
Offer shall request seller to pay, and then whatever your commission is, I just wrote 2.5.
yeah, I would say buyer's obligations under this. Is
A binder obligation.
Buyer's obligation.
well,
Buyer's obligation.
offer shall. Request.
You
said
buyer.
It should be offered, it's the offers, the offer shall request. One conversation. Whatever you-
The buyer will need to sign it.
I think so, yeah.
Well, wouldn't Benny be able to put a property showing and representation agreement?
You could, that's, I was gonna get to that, there's another option, the property showing and representation agreement. That agreement's much easier to get signed. That agreement, you can make that, the property showing and representation agreement, make the term of that 1 day. And then make it for that property owner,
We do it.
right? So if you do that agreement for 1 day for one property only, it's pretty easy to tell to the buyer, what's your application? You see this one property, you like it, we do a deal. You don't like it, we're done. I'm not part of your life anymore. Yes,
I'm the listing agent. Someone told me he wanted to see my list.
this is different. For a listing agent, someone calls you, wants to see it, refuses to sign any of the buyer compensation agreements, you can use the open house agreement to show it. You can use, the listing agent gets a phone call, and the phone call refuses to sign the PSRA, they refuse to sign the DRPC. Since you are the listing agent, you can use that agreement to show them. Even better, since I'm your broker, you all take listings on my behalf. You can do that for any listing within the office. Stephen Hall has a listing, Maureen wants to show it. They refuse to sign anything. You can create a one-off open house just for that one thing. But you can't do that. You don't. You can also, you can't do that for listings. Yes.
So if they refuse to sign either one.
That's correct.
Even a listing.
They're gonna have to sign something. Period, end of story. The days of just rolling out with the buyer with no agreement at all are gone. They're gone. Now, she had a question, I think, right?
Yes, I just wanted to get this clear. Sorry, page 1H. Should I just put down seller to offer buyer's obligation?
What the language that we were using there is all offers, all offers shall request. All offers shall request seller to pay buyer's obligation under this. Okay.
Thank you.
I have a new listing that's gonna get marketed.
Yes.
So if a buyer wants to see the house and wants to schedule an appointment with me. I need to DocuSign this to them, I would request for their email and I would DocuSign this form, or do I? need
Yeah. For listing agent, you either need open house form where it's not an agency, I'm just showing you. The SRA or the RDC, one of the,
Cause I'm not gonna have them with the house. Since they refused.
yeah, that's pretty much how I do. I'm not going out there unless I know you signed what you need to sign.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
For PFRA, for the other terms, you pay salary. Right?
No, you can't, because what was, you use the same language we would use on H. On the other, because we can't make the seller do anything, all we can do is request. Okay? So, and that way, you know, the buyer's gonna say, okay, I know I'm obligated here, but we're gonna ask the seller in the offer. And if the seller says no, the buyer can say, fine, you know, I'm done. It's part of the offer. And the seller counters, no, I'm not gonna pay your broker's commission. The buyer says, I'm not gonna accept that counter offer, you're done. Right?
I know, it's sad.
Sad, yeah, Marie's counting out for lost commission. Well, it's like a.
Oh, it's sad for the buyer that doesn't get the house.
Well, the thing is, I think what you're gonna find out. Is remember, I mean, all you guys have experienced this, you have a buyer and the first offer they write, kind of lowball. They get, you know, they lose a couple of deals, and also they start listening to you, right? They take the marketplace and beat them up and they make it. The same's gonna happen with this, you know, it's like, hey, listen, you know, you keep telling me only to show you places where they're willing to consider your commission. It's limiting the amount of houses I'm showing you. Yeah, I think you better open this up or you might not get any. That's. And then, okay, let's amend the agreement and start showing you other pieces. Yeah, and it's gonna take 6 months to a year before the buyers in general. Start forgetting that there was ever a whole way of doing it. But over time, I think this will evolve into a better place. This first year or so is gonna be the rough thing. Yes,
I have a question.
and then I'll get to use it.
Under the condition that the buyer decides to submit an offer on $1 million property, seller says, I'm not going to pay you 100%. Could you request a that can offer to 1.2025?
Yeah, well, they say they're not gonna pay, how, they usually say they're not gonna pay in a counter offer, right? And if they say, I'm not gonna do a counter offer, you can call the agent, hey, give me one, you know, I might be able to get a deal that. That's the typical fact. Sir,
Yeah,
and then I'll get to you.
who are the two most important people in a real estate transaction?
Well, me and the escrow officer. No, I mean,
And neither one of them had an opportunity to be involved in it.
yeah, well, now they do, because this is all.
Yeah, they were forty on it, no one took the buyer or the seller's idea on any of this. Two most important people in a transaction have no say.
Well, I think that's what the NAR settlement was trying to address. Marine, did you?
Yeah, well, I have a situation where I'm showing a client, she's using the reverse mortgage monies.
Yeah.
So she doesn't have it. It's just in the reverse. I heard that FHA will allow them to pay.
Yeah, both VA and FHA have now allowed, because before they weren't allowed to pay their agents direct. And both FHA and VA have changed that rule.
So where's that money?
From the lender.
Of the land.
But, you
So
know,
how would the buyer sign?
the buyer's gonna write the offer and,
No, I'm talking about the buyer representation.
they're just gonna fill it out the same way.
The same
Have it fill out the same.
And another question is, can you just explain, I know what non-exclusive and exclusive, is, but in this case, it's just confusing me, where it says non-exclusive. Yeah, compensation is payable only if there was broker involved.
So the biggest difference on the buyer broker agreement between exclusive and non-exclusive. It doesn't mean what we all think it means, is that you can be the only agent for that person, no matter what. It's exclusive. The buyer can be stupid and sign 17 exclusive agreements. So that's the first thing. But remember, in the first page of the buyer broker agreement, you're specifying property types and locations. So for example, you can have an exclusive agreement with one agent to show properties between 1.5 and 2 million on the Palos Verdes Peninsula only. And they could have another exclusive agreement with me, a Pasadena agent, who else would you choose in Pasadena? To show that houses between 1.5 and 2 million in Pasadena. And those two exclusive agreements would not conflict, right? They would. So look at exclusive and non-exclusive in this other one that I'm about to explain. By signing an exclusive agreement, if they buy that in the Palos Verdes Peninsula at 1.5 to 2 million, let's say they use Stephen to do that, and they use another agent during that contract. He had an exclusive agreement for that area. If it was a non-exclusive agreement, they only have to pay Stephen is if he had what do they call it, participation or broker involvement. They only have, if it's not exclusive, they only have to pay him if there's broker involvement. Now, broker involvement is pretty broad. If Stephen sent him an email saying this is a property I think you should look at, involved. If Stephen did the CMA saying, hey, this is a good property for you. I've looked at these comps and I think the offer price should be this, even if Stephen doesn't write the offer. If Stephen showed them, we're involved. But if Stephen did nothing and didn't show them the property or anything, there was no broker involved. So they wouldn't have. So think of exclusive and non-exclusive in those terms. Okay. Is, not of, hey, if it's exclusive, they can only sign the contract. Now, the moral of this story also is to be very careful filling out paragraphs 2B1 and 2B2 of the buyer representation agreement. So, I think I taught this in the classes, but be very specific in saying the property type you're looking for, the location you're looking for, and that way it's going to be a lot easier to enforce your contract if the buyer did do something dumb and basically signed up agreements with more than one agent for the same areas, right? Or at the same price points. So yes.
So if the buyer signs the agreement for the peninsula between 1 and 2 million, but then they go and buy a house for $2,001,000 with somebody else, they're off the. Why would you even put the price?
Yeah, I'm looking at the new buyer representation agreement.
It doesn't even.
It doesn't have a price now.
There's no price.
There used to be, and I'm sorry, it's hard for me to press all the changes as well. It doesn't have a price, it just.
Doesn't even have the there.
Oh, it does. It does have location.
Yeah.
But prices. But still be super specific. The more specific you get, the better these agreements. Because if there is a conflict and it looks like it might go to agents, there's going to at least be a mediation. And you want to give the mediator all the ammunition to push them to pay you, right? And if the agreement's paid, You lost that ammunition, it's like. Location, California, property type, any. They're gonna say it's too late. And they're not gonna push to enforce. So be as specific as possible, you're protecting yourself. Rosia, did you have a question?
Yes, I have a scenario. What if the buyer goes directly to the listing agent? And the seller does not want to pay a commission, and the buyer does not have any money, and the listing agent represent that buyer?
Well, not if you had a agreement for that location and area. You know. Because you had an agreement with the buyer, the listing agent didn't. Right? You're gonna get paid. Whether the listing agent likes it or not.
Not to say like buyer that just walks into an open house, they have the listing agents there. The seller's not paying a commission, and the buyer does not have the funds to pay for the commission.
Well, the listing agent would have to have some sort of buyer agreement with that buyer, and maybe it says deal. Because they're willing to take it, the listing agent's willing to do it just for their listing site.
Doesn't that buyer have some sort of representation, you know, for to cover them?
Well, they walked in the door, right? They didn't have an agent. And then they said they wanted the listing agent to represent. E&O will still cover it if it's zero commission, because it's in the same office and they are getting some commission from the listings. Is it messed up? Yeah. Now, E&O's not mistaken. And because if there's a claim that pops up, they saw zero commission, they're gonna, we get red marks for the number of claims filed against the office. And E&O doesn't like claims, all deals at zero. The people who really don't like it are your office guys. We're capitalists. No, we don't want you taking zero commission. We want, there's got to be some cut for the office here. So there's going to be office rules. And before you cut your commission on the buy side, you got to be checking with your team leader. You got to have permission. Okay. It's all negotiable, but we don't work for free. Office, you know the main reason why the office needs money? They have to pay you.
Yeah, right.
Free.
This is kind of going maybe further, the unrepresented
Yes.
in the listing agreement, talk to the seller.
Yeah.
About what, charging.
Right.
And
Yeah.
but I'm talking to, or anyway, the unrepresented buyer in the listing agreement, it says a check.
Yeah.
Are you charging for the unrepresented buyer? I mean, I'm doing paper. Yeah, so I do charge for that.
As well you should.
Right. Am I at all, can make a mistake and say something or whatever? I'm not liable to any.
So what Marie's referring to is, I don't think the listing agreements. But the list, no, it's okay, it's an important issue. And the new listing agreement has a new category. They eliminate all the compensation by a broker listing. And first it says what percentage are you paying the listing agent, right? So the new category is, hey, if there's an unrepresented buyer, how much are you going to pay the listing agent to assist that buyer in doing the paperwork?
Well, it doesn't say paperwork. I'm the one.
Well, I'm translating the agreement in.
Right.
So I've been putting 1.5% on my agreements for, and my sellers have been signing. But in addition to that, if you are dealing with an unrepresented buyer as listing agent, you have to have them sign a buyer non-agency form in zip forms, B&A, buyer non-agency. And what that form says is, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, I'm helping you fill out paperwork, but I'm not your agent. I will give you no advice, price, I will give you no price or terms. I'm gonna just tell you, here's the forms you need to complete a real estate transaction. I have access, so every time I fill out a form, I'm not your agent. And it says very clearly on the form, you can't sue me because I wasn't your agent. So, but that's key. If you're handling an unrepresented buyer, use that buyer non-agent.
That's dual agents.
It's not dual agents. You are not the buyer's agent.
No, that's not.
They probably
All you're doing is filling out the form. Yeah, you're gonna say, how much you want for price, okay? How much you want for down payment? Boom. Well, what's your recommendation? No recommendations. I'm not your agent. What do you want? You're gonna have to be cold blood, like, I am not your agent. You said you did not want to be represented. If you want to be represented, thanks for that. Right? You want me to work?
And that's, yeah.
You want my advice? Especially if it's a lawyer. How much do you charge for your time? Well, I charge this, okay, you want my advice? So look at,
Yes, so, let's say a buyer would, sign a one property showing.
the PS one.
Yes, so I show that, but then is there a time there that I could put down that then he could just go with his cousin and buy the property? And
Yes,
this happens,
yes, they could, but, there's always sort of risk. That's why I'm gonna be trying to get people to sign the lumber. I'm trying to remember,
The long one.
let's look at something real quick. Yeah, there's no protection of that in the PS one, right? There is protection against that in the PRGs, but not in the PS.
okay,
That's one of the drawbacks.
okay.
Okay.
Can you explain one more time about the differences? If your BRBC says a certain percent and the seller is offering a different percent compensation, are you not allowed to get a certain amount?
Well, remember, the seller's not offering compensation. You're requesting it through the RPA.
Okay.
But maybe this is the situation you're trying to address. Is your buyer broker agreement says 2.5 and the seller counters back and says, I'm only gonna pay 2. Do you have the right to waive that extra 0.5% and only charge your buyer 2%?
Yeah.
Yes, you do. Waive. Okay, is that what you were?
We need a bit more.
You would probably amend the buyer broker agreement with an amendment so that the buyer felt comfortable that they weren't gonna get nicked for the money. Yeah. Yes,
Jeff, I had that same situation just happen.
Yeah.
And there is no amendment that has the buyer signature line and my signature or my broker.
cross it out and say, why, the amendment form card, so cross it out and put buyer.
Yeah, it just says buyer.
I mean,
or
just-
sellers.
You can amend any agreement, just because a car form doesn't exist for it, doesn't mean you can't do it. And car will probably start realizing this. And come up with amendment form -B for buyer, amendment form -S for seller. It's new for them as well. So. But don't, and if you have questions like that, call me. Although I never take your calls. I do think. He's too nice. Okay. Any other questions? Did we cover the key issues today?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can the G2
Where are you? What page you
on
on?
the file?
You're on G2.
You would just check one of those, right?
You can get one of those where they say they don't have money. But you still want to have something in there, okay, you don't have the money, what do you want me to do? Well, I want you to only show me properties with sellers willing
And
to.
that's other terms.
Oh,
So that's what I mean.
So when we're asking the seller to pay the broker's compensation, does it show who the channel shows they keep the broker?
Oh, how does it work in escrow? Yeah, escrow,
It's not.
escrow will alter their escrow instructions to show how that's getting paid. And escrow's been working that out for their disorder. So you'll see the escrow instructions with some.
Okay.
Like, for example, if the buyer pays, there is gonna be only an amendment to the buyers.
So it's not, because I was under the impression that it would go to the buyer, had it, and then the buyer.
Well,
paid.
that's the other way. The buyer's obligation is instead of checking paragraph 3B3, the seller can agree to give the buyer a concession if they request. But the concession mechanism is a little more complicated. So first of all, you can't specify that that concession is to pay the buyer. It just has to be enough money to cover it. The second thing is that if you're asking for a concession, someone better check with the lender. To make sure the lender's okay with it. Because remember, the lender will approve all credits. The good thing about the commission mechanism is the lenders are not going to consider that to be a concession. So you don't have to ask permission.
Exactly.
But concession is a way of, but the other thing is then, what if the buyer decides to stiff, the broker, blah, 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 they really bad. But the buyer does have, a written agreement with the broker, and the broker can submit that to escrow and say, you need to, pull this out of money that buyer's bringing in to pay me. And if they don't, we can hold up escrow. Before we couldn't hold up escrow, but now we're a party to it because the buyer owes us money. Are we gonna do it? So it doesn't come up, but frankly, I think we're gonna have to if people start stiffing us.
Okay, you mentioned that if buys are represented, recommend to put down 1.5% instead of 2.5%.
For buyer commission.
Yeah, no, in the two, no, not in the two agents, in the listing agreement C2.
Yeah.
You will mention that additional compensation to sell if buys are represented.
Yeah, I've been putting 1.5 in, but it's whatever you negotiate.
We can do 2.5 too.
Whatever you can negotiate. Someone handed me a copy of Zillow's touring agreement. And it's really their version, of the open house. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could put anything. You could put-
yeah, so Zillow's lawyer put this together. Carr will not like this because Carr will think this is non-compliant, but Zillow wants to do that.
It's a shame. What won't be compliant?
Carr?
What wouldn't be compliant?
It doesn't specifically talk about. I think that Carr would think that it's not clear enough that, about agents. Either, it doesn't say whether there's agency or not, and that's what.
I'm finding an exclusive to anybody,
Yeah, but that's exclusivity, does not,
no fees.
yeah, but where does it talk about where's the agents or non-agents?
You need
It doesn't use those terms, so I think, I know car terms. But that's Zillow's problem, not our problem. We're gonna use our terms because we want to make sure we're very clear about agents. I think Zillow should be more careful, but they haven't hired legal advisors.
So Jack, the So listing agent, there's a good chance we might represent both buyer and the seller as an individual agent. If that's the case, we just have this residential list agreement and also PRP sign. That's like a regular one.
Absolutely. Alicia, did you have?
Yes, I don't know if you ever watched or read Jeff Glover's 2.0.
I did.
Scripts. Oh, okay. I just wanted to know if they're acceptable to you.
Everything I've ever seen from Jeff Glover is extremely good. You know, I haven't seen that. Yes,
As a listing agent, before the buyer's agent show the property, do I need to see the sign form?
no, we don't need to verify that an agent bringing a client by has the form. That's their compliance issue, not ours. And that's a really good question, because I've gotten that question from a lot of people. And I know there's some listing agents out there insisting that they have to be shown your agreement with the buyer. No, they don't. That's just wrong. And I checked with a couple of things. Yes,
But the dual agency, maybe I got confused. We still have to, the buyer have to sign the buyer.
yeah, let's just see the.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure.
This is for the listing agreement, just a little. C1, C2, C3.
So C1 is the amount of commission that the seller is going to pay you as listing agent.
Yes.
I think it's C1. Let me
Yes.
take it on.
You want
C2. Let me have it for a
Yes.
sec. C2 is the compensation if there is an unrepresented buyer, which we talked about.
Yeah.
Or you're not the agent. C3. Oh, C3 is really something that's been on the listing agreement forever. It's just they rephrased it. It's remember on the old listing agreement, you would say, hey, if you receive an offer from someone who saw the property during the listing period, and they submit an offer for, I always put in 60 days after expiration, and the seller accepts that offer and escrow closes, you still get a commission. C3 is just asking what that time period should be.
So how many?
Well, it's up on you. Excuse me, please. It's up to you how many days. I've always put in 6.
Okay.
But if you're going for 180, like Maureen said, please explain to your client exactly what it means and make sure they understand that time period. Because I've been in mediations where long time periods like that have been in agreement. And the customer has said, well, I had no idea what that really meant. And the agent never really told me. And the mediator or arbitrator wasn't very strong on wanting to enforce that because he didn't think the agent had been transparent. So especially when you're asking for something that's beyond the norm or beyond what, real estate attorneys or judges might consider normal or reasonable, make sure you've explained it and maybe even confirmed it in email. Because then, if the guy says, oh, I didn't understand what 180 meant in that clause, and then you have an email where you said, and we agreed that if X, Y, and Z happens within 180 days, they still get paid, you can hold up the email. What do you mean they didn't understand? They sent this email and they responded. And that kind of closes the door.
Years ago, 180 was.
Yeah, well, I'm just word to the one. I'm in charge of personnel.
No, I just want to clarify. C2 is for unrepresented buyer, meaning you're not giving any consultation.
Yeah, you're just filling out forms.
And for representatives, like your choice one, to put,
No, because if you're gonna represent both sides, you'll be doing the separate RBC with the one. Okay, there's a question back in the room.
Yeah.
Offer subject to the agent spending ADR with the past and written. Text and call them, yes.
page 5 of the BRDC.
Yes.
And so if they haven't met the condition, you don't have an agreement to. Correct. Do it.
Yes, so let's say C2 and a buyer agrees to pay me 2.5. So when I'm submitting as a dual agent. So when I'm
See,
submitting,
no, wait a minute, C2 have nothing to do with dual agents.
so if the buyer also, and then I'm writing it off with my seller.
Yeah.
2.5 or 1.5, whatever that.
Yeah, whatever.
Well, there's no more of that 1.5 to 2%.
Yeah, C2 will not apply. C2 will not apply in that situation, because you have dual agency as opposed to filling out forms for unrepresented buyers.
Yes. And one other question, if I may, please. So I'm getting a listing. This couple, way back, we were talking about the commission for both sides and all that. So I'm gonna be meeting them in a few days. So I'll have to explain the changes and all that. So should I just say, because they were thinking that they have to pay 2.5, so say we don't need to do that once we receive the offer, then you will decide, is that how I should?
Well, what I've told clients is, listen, it's a new construct and we're all still working with it. But my experience out there in the field, Mr. Seller, is that most sellers are still paying it because they want to receive the most offers possible. And if you decide that you're not going to compensate the buyer's broker, I think you're going to be cutting half of your available buyers out of the agreement. So what I request for you is to consider any offer that asks you to compensate the buyer's broker. And you don't have to commit to a number now, but I tell you that it's likely that you're gonna probably have to pony up between 2 and 2.5%. But let's wait till the offers come in. And when we get the offers, let's not look at that percentage in isolation. Let's look at the total offer in terms and condition and see which one offers you the most money in your pocket at the end of the day, irrespective of how much commission you're paying the buyer's broker. And then that's the offer we should try to get close. Does that sound like a good plan? Yeah, it sounds great. I'll keep an open mind about paying the buyer's broker commission. But at the end of the day, it's all about what puts the most money in my pocket. Great, let's move forward. Let's get this solved.
Makes sense.
To follow up on what you said, I was doing exactly that. If I were, we allowed to put on our open house, we just steering away from like just announcing what the seller is going to pay on our open house.
Well,
Advertising, just so we can stay compliant.
Is that the best thing for yourself?
Yeah.
I think the best thing is, and it is legal by law, if the seller has authorized you to say anywhere except in, that they're gonna pay 2.5 to a buyer's broker. If they authorize you to say it, you can say it. However, is that what's best for your seller? I think the best thing to say is that, hey, we'll consider any offer that asks us to pay the buyer's obligation. And that way, you're making the buyer and the buyer's agent come up with what strategy they think is best to acquire the property. So I know that other agencies like Coldwell Banker are even having signs printed up saying, seller will pay 5 commission. I'm not sure, and then posting it as headers on the signs.
Unbelievable.
And, if I'm going up against a Coldwell Banker agent for a listing, I'm gonna say, it's very likely we're gonna have to pay a buyer commission. But, do we have to state that amount? Do you think that, Do you think it's the buyer or the agent who's more attracted by that sign?
Agent.
It's the agent, so let's work to, with a mechanism that serves your interests best. And still is going to attract lots of buyers, because as soon as you say you're willing to consider it. You're gonna get all buyers. You don't have to put a certain. Unless the market gets dead slow and becomes a total buyer's market. I don't think you have to. And we're not in a total buyer's market, right? That's my opinion. I mean, that's just my thoughts on it. I'm seeing, as broker in many offices. 90% of the offers, buyers offering or asking for 2 or 2.5% commission. And the sellers are going. I haven't seen a big this.
Okay, as a listing agent, I've been getting so many phone calls from the buyers. So what's the better way, easier way? To let the buyer agent know, yes, we are paying the.
I haven't figured that out. I mean, maybe you put it on your individual website.
If we
I don't know.
that as a house,
Alright,
if people come to the open house, we just say we are paying 2.5, we just post a sign there.
you can do it.
Yes, we can do it. No, inside the house,
Yeah,
when people come to the open house, so we don't have to explain to one other agent.
we look at all offers. We look at all, I mean, you want, submit the offer, my client will consider. That's all I've been saying, but you're right, I've been getting a ton of phone calls on it, I could probably set up a separate recording. Yes, I'm telling you what to say. That's.
A couple of months ago, we were at a team meeting and it was suggested that we not put anything in writing regarding commissions. And I know this is ever evolving, but we were told not to put in email or text message, just do verbal.
Who said that?
I think it was Monday.
Yeah, I mean, there is, there's well communication on this. You cannot put it on the MLS, right? But if someone asks you if the sellers consider, and that's why I'm recommending to say the seller will consider, as opposed to a specific amount. The risk management attorneys I've talked to have said that it's in all likelihood okay to say, hey, my seller is willing to consider up to 2.5, this, that, and the other thing. But at the end of the day, it's gonna be the actual purchase term.
Right,
But-
but if a potential buyer's agent call or texts and says, is the seller paying commission? I usually just pick up the phone and call them, so can I text them back?
Just tell them the seller's willing to consider offers that request. Then you're clean and
Willing to
communicate what you want to communicate.
Thank you.
Now, but most of the attorneys do think it's all right to say a specific amount. But I'm going to err on the side.
Yeah, ultimately, we already need what got us into the first place. If I say it's 3%, and then I found out somebody would have accepted 2%. Did I do my due diligence and did I act as a fiduciary when I cost them some money by this?
That's right, and that is why I'm telling my sellers, this is a private conversation between you and me. The market's generally paying 2 and 2.5% to the buyers, but at the end of the day, let's just say we're willing to look at all offers. We'll look at all the offers where they have asking you to pay commission or not. We'll see which one makes most financial sense. And then we'll proceed. And I'm telling you, I think you'll end up having to get that best offer. But at the end of the day, if I get you the most money, we did great. But why give away 3%, or 2.5% when someone might come in with the best offer only asking for one? So that's my recommendation, and that's what I'd really like to see. And as I said, if the market shifts, and there's
24 months worth of inventory and only one buyer there. I'm sure you'll see other agencies doing other things. I just don't see that happening. So,
Now you can see.
yeah. Okay, I see one hand raised up there.
Jack, we got an email from PVPAR on July 24th. Just saying the form, July 24th is here.
Yeah.
At the bottom, say we highly recommend to have a signed by a representation agreement with the client. Highly recommended. That's not mandatory.
Well, that's, I don't. PVPR, they can say whatever they want. It's mandatory. Period. It's mandatory. Mandatory. In this office, if you're representing a buyer and we don't see that in your file, you got a problem. Okay? It's mandatory. Here. Don't even think there's wiggle room. Was am I clear?
I think there are a lot of agents in here for a long time being in the business. Remember one time, there were a lot of people asking for credit, like credit the.
I remember 2008, 2009.
Okay. Not this.
Yeah.
I know we have to pay attention to the contract, okay, but recently, for the 20 years, nobody asked that. But we're just so used to the commission. 2.5 or whatever it is on multiple listing. I think as a reminder, we have to look at it. Who is asking what commission? It could be all different, 1%, 2.5, because it will be in the contract, in the offer. I'm just,
Yeah, we have to make sure that we're looking carefully at the SPVV, right? And making sure that we clearly communicate that to the seller. You're absolutely right. I mean, I have a whole Excel spreadsheet put together on how to, especially to talk about multiple offers with the client that end up with a net proceeds column. And part of it is, are they asking for permission? Are they asking for home warranty? Are they asking for concessions? And then, invariably with this listing I had in Monrovia, my client's eye went to the bottom line, not the commission. Right? And by the way, the deal that we accepted, we're paying a 2.5% commission. And there was one that offered 2%. But that deal put $20,000 less money in my seller's pocket. So at the end of the day, they made the decision on the right basis, right?
Right.
We just have to steer them toward that with tools that show them we're working to make sure you get the most. Okay? Then we're doing our job.
Could you please just go over this SPVB one more time, because it's just a little bit confusing. So it's talking about the property and then buyer, seller. But this is gonna go with the offer, right?
That's right.
So.
So look at 1A.
Yes.
Seller agrees to pay buyer's broker so-and-so percent of purchase price. That has to be the same amount that's on your buyer's broker agreement. And then it says maximum seller payment obligation. Seller shall only be obligated to buy buyer's broker the lesser of the amount specified in 1A or the amount buyers obligated to buyer's broker pursuant to their buyer rep agreement. In other words, don't try and ask the seller for more money than what's on your buyer rep agreement, because that's specifically prohibited in the NAR settlement. And they have this B there just to make sure that some of our less scrupulous brothers and sisters out there don't try and get more money than what's on the buyer rep agreement. Okay? It's that simple. And then we have to submit page 5
of the buyer rep agreement. To show what that amount was. Okay, that's number 3. Delivery of buyer representation agreement. Buyer authorized buyer's broker, if applicable, escrow holder to deliver the seller or seller's broker a copy of the portion of the buyer rep agreement identifying the compensation. That portion of the agreement, and it says here, last page of car form BRBC, that's page 5. So I'm not gonna wait for people to ask me for that portion. I'm gonna submit it right with the SPUD to show I'm doing things to it.
Oh, thank you very much.
Can you just counter this?
If the seller wants to pay less, you counter it. Yeah, if the seller gets this and says, I want to pay 2.5, it's in the counter.
Okay.
And the counter offer will say seller agrees to pay buyer's broker.
But I meant the buyer's broker, you have to listen to buyer's broker do not give that,
Well, then you counter it, say yes.
rather than.
It's just like any offer that didn't fill in something correct, you counter it, so they fill it in correct.
Yeah, it's just.
Hey, you didn't check the box for arbitration, fix. Same thing.
Yes, to recap, writing an offer for our buyers. Fill out the RPA, page 5 of the buyer rep agreement. Buyer compensation.
Well, you're gonna check paragraph 3G3 with the RPA. You're gonna fill out the SPUE, and you're gonna include page 5 of the RPC. And if it's a full moon in October, you're gonna.
State, it's probably best to put in a buyer we to just include all that's with the offer, right? So that we're not ignoring all these little things.
Well,
Obviously,
you can say in private remarks. I would be careful about what you say in private remarks, because if you're asking the buyer to include these forms, then you're telling them to request permission. So I think it's been best. Well, a smart agent always calls you, well, first they offer anyway. And you're gonna say, are you guys planning to ask for permission? Yes, well, make sure you do X, Y, Z. Much better, right? We want to be really careful with the MLS. If anything, the Department of Justice is gonna be looking carefully at, it's the MLS. So I don't want to get crazy, but I don't want private remarks even hinting about offers of compensation. I mean, no nudge, wink, wink, so not, absolutely not.
I have a question, sorry.
Back,
Maybe I'm looking one, but I talked to a couple sellers, potential sellers that are pushing back on paying compensation. Buyer agent, and their argument is that, like, say for a $4 million Millennials estate property, they're looking at cash offers most of the time. They know that the buyers can pay commission. What's your argument to them as like trying to get them to pay buyer compensation when they say, how is that in my fiduciary best interest to pay when there's cash buyers and $4 million?
Listen, get yourself, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm not telling you you have to pay for it. I'm asking you to consider. So if we get 4 offers, let's not look at how much commission they're asking for. Let's look at what the bottom line net is. And if the bottom line net's deal where you don't have to pay in commission, fantastic, we're gonna take it. But if you have 4 offers and the best deal is one that gets you 100K more than all the other offers, and that includes you paying the 2% commission, let's move forward. All I'm asking you to do is consider it. And let's try the maximum amount of offers we can. We'll look and see what's best for you. And we'll. Okay, thank you.
That's something I would say back.
It's not about how much, it's just the same argument we had back in the day when they were trying to get discounts on their listing. It's like, guys, do you want an agent who's gonna drop their pants immediately like that and give away their own money? Or do you want an agent who's willing to stand up for their own commission, but also willing to stand up and get you the absolutely best price because we're raising our negotiators? If you give me my 2.5% commission, guarantee you, I'm gonna get you a list of offers, get you better deals than the guy who said 1%. You know, if you're willing to drop his pants on his commission, what do you think you're gonna do with you? I mean, it's so many problems.
Just want to say to John, the one thing that you need to also give is the seller payment. Right? With the offer, he said, I said, I can't get it. Oh, I don't.
Yeah, so shame. Okay. Is this helpful? You guys can get it tomorrow, I will pay that.